There was little or no suggestion within the psychiatric community that homosexuality might be conceptualized as anything other than a mental illness that needed to be treated. In 1973, the American Psychiatric Association asked all members attending its convention to vote on whether they believed homosexuality to be a mental disorder. 5,854 psychiatrists voted to remove it from the DSM and 3,810 to retain it. The American Psychiatric Association removes homosexuality from its official list of mental disorders.
Somewhere in Des Moines or San Antonio, there's a young gay person who all of a sudden realizes that she or he is gay, knows that if the parents find out, they'll be tossed out of the house. The classmates would taunt the child, and the Anita Bryans and John Briggs are doing their bit on TV, and that child had several options. Staying in a closet, suicide, and then one day that child might open a paper and it says homosexual elected in San Francisco, and there are two new options. The option is to go to California, stay in San Antonio and fight. 2 days after I was elected, I got a phone call, and the voice was quite young. It was from Altoona, Pennsylvania, and the person said, "Thanks. And you've got to let gay people, so that that young child and the thousands and thousands like that child know that there's hope for a better world. There's hope for a better tomorrow. Without hope, not only gays, but those blacks, and the Asians, and the disabled, and the seniors, the S's. Without hope, the S's give up. I know that you cannot live on hope alone, but without it, life is not worth living. And you've got to give them hope. Thank you very much.
Harvey Milk became one of the first openly gay officials in the United States in 1977 when he was elected to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. In late 1972, Milk moved to San Francisco, California, and there he opened a camera shop called Castro Camera on Castro Street. As Castro Camera increasingly became a neighborhood center, Milk found his voice as a leader and activist. In 1973, he declared his candidacy for a position on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. His candidacy lasted for a year until tragedy struck.
Good evening to outsiders and even to some San Franciscans. It must appear the city has gone a little insane. Just as everyone is beginning to come to grips with the mindless murder-suicide of over 900 members of the San Francisco-based People's Temple, word screams out over the radio, the television, the newspapers that another tragedy is upon us.
Over here. Get an ambulance. A unit over here. Get another ambulance. I'll go over there. Okay.
Yeah, where are the victims going? I don't know if they're going anywhere. They're supposed to, Harvey Milk and the mayor are supposed to be DOA.
As president of the board, as president of the Board of Supervisors, it's my duty to make this announcement. Both Mayor Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk have been shot and killed.
millions of people. And that feeling of such loss, having lost someone who was so important and something, Harvey stood for something more than just him.
Of Harvey killed, and a combination of going down with all those people. It's nighttime in San Francisco, and a bunch of strangers around you, and you feel as safe as if you're doing your own home.
Down to City Hall, that tremendous expanse of people, and I turned to John and I said, Harvey would have loved this. When we
Scientists at the National Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta today released the results of a study which shows that the lifestyle of some male homosexuals has triggered an epidemic of a rare form of cancer. Robert Bazell now in Atlanta.
Bobby Campbell of San Francisco and Billy Walker of New York both suffer from a mysterious newly discovered disease which affects mostly homosexual men, but has also been found in heterosexual men and women. The condition severely weakens the body's ability to fight disease. Many victims get a rare form of cancer called Kaposi sarcoma. Others get an infection known as pneumocystis pneumonia. Researchers know of 413 people who have contracted the condition in the past year. 1/3 have died and none have been cured.
Today, researchers here at the National Centers for Disease Control said they had found several cases where people who had been sex partners both had the condition. The scientists say this probably means they are dealing with some new, deadly, sexually transmitted disease.
The investigators see this as a serious public health problem.
From an epidemic point of view, there have been more deaths from Kaposi sarcoma and pneumocystis pneumonia than have occurred with all the cases of toxic shock syndrome and the Philadelphia outbreak of Legionnaire's disease combined.
Researchers are now studying blood and other samples from the victims, trying to learn what is causing the disease. So far, they have had no luck. Robert Bazell, NBC News, Atlanta.
The 1980s were the height of the AIDS epidemic inside the gay community. AIDS had struck so many young gay men that the disease was called the gay cancer since no one knew the name. Male-to-male sex had been the most common mode of exposure among persons reported with AIDS, being 46%. In the 1980s, people were so afraid of the disease, doctors in major medical journals debated whether they had a moral obligation to treat people with AIDS. Faith communities called patients with HIV an abomination.
Homosexuality is a sin.
It was California Republican William Dannemeyer who recently declared on the House floor God's plan for man was Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Dannemeyer leads a group of conservative Republicans who hope to make AIDS a political issue. They meet to plan strategy for bringing controversial AIDS-related legislation to the House floor.
At some point, the public is going to demand action, frankly, to get on with protecting the public health.
HIV killed more than 14,000 people by the end of the 1980s.
At issue for Austin voters today is an amendment to the city's Fair Housing Code that reads, "It shall not be unlawful to deny housing on the basis of sexual orientation."
In 1982, Wisconsin becomes the first U.S. state to protect lesbians and gay men from discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations.
The case of an ROTC midshipman barred from today's drill at MIT eventually could help change the policy that keeps homosexuals from military service. The story of Robert Bedecker has drawn national attention to the issue. Not only was the MIT senior kicked out of ROTC last fall after he realized he was gay and informed authorities, but the Navy also ordered Bedecker to repay the $39,000 cost of his university education.
I want to serve my country, and I only have good things to say about ROTC and the ROTC program. But until the military starts judging people on their abilities and their performance rather than their sexual orientation, universities should not support ROTC.
Now, Holabaugh and others are seeking support at campus rallies nationwide. Anti-ROTC sentiment is increasing for the first time since the Vietnam War. The issue today is gay rights. The Defense Department views homosexuality as incompatible with military service and cites morale, discipline, and security among the reasons.
Current Pentagon policy says having homosexuals in the military undermines morale, discipline, and leadership. But critics say the military is reflecting a prejudice.
In 1993, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy is instituted for the U.S. military, permitting gays to serve in the military but banning homosexual activity.
Basically, they're saying the presence of gay people in the service would upset other people. Now, I think it's best to look at that point historically and to realize that it's the exact same reason, the exact same mentality that was used to keep blacks and later women out of the military.
Here has discharged almost 1,000 service members based on their sexual orientation, and that within the last 10 years they've discharged over 13,000.
The term was coined after President Bill Clinton in 1993 signed a law directing the military personnel, don't ask, don't tell, don't pursue, and don't harass.
To be homosexual and want to serve their country honorably in uniform, obeying all the military's rules against sexual misconduct. It is the best way to proceed because it provides a sensible balance between the rights of the individual and the needs of our military to remain the world's #1 fighting force. I must now look to General Powell, to the Joint Chiefs, to all the other leaders in our military to carry out this policy through effective training and leadership. Every officer will be expected to exert the necessary effort to make this policy work. That has been the key every time the military has successfully addressed a new challenge, and it will be key in this effort too. Our military is a conservative institution, and I say that in the very best sense. For its purpose is to conserve the fighting spirit of our troops, to conserve the resources and the capacity of our troops, to conserve the military lessons acquired during our nation's existence, to conserve our very security, and yes, to conserve the liberties of the American people. Because it is a conservative institution, it is right for the military to be wary of sudden changes. Because it is an institution that embodies the best of America and must reflect the society in which it operates, it is also right for the military to make changes when the time for change is at hand.